Aloha, this is Dan. From 2016 to 2017, I tried my hand at putting out video essays about film topics on YouTube. The production of it was more than I could handle at the time, so I shut it down after only several episodes. But now that I'm getting my podcast up and running again, I've reworked the audio from that show into podcast episodes, which I will publish by the dates that the YouTube episodes were originally published or intended to be published. This one was originally from January 10th, 2017. New content is on the way as well. Alright, welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Movie Talk. In this episode, I want to defend one of my favorite movies ever. I ain't afraid of no bad YouTube reviews, so I actually have not seen the recent 2016 Ghostbusters reboot, remake, whatever. I will see it just to see it at some point, but that whole thing was just, oh my gosh, the whole controversy was, oh. But what happened, in the past year or so that the hype machine has been going on that movie, even though maybe it's been there for years and I just wasn't paying attention, but I feel like people have been coming out of the woodwork, especially YouTubers, to just hate on Ghostbusters 2. Now, I have a soft spot for some movies that people hate. I hope to do a video on that sooner than later. I did not realize that Ghostbusters 2 was such a derided movie. So obviously I love to talk about movies, and hopefully just as obviously I'm a huge nerd about them. That I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. So I grew up in the afterglow of movies that my parents really enjoyed. So I'm talking Star Wars, Star Trek movies, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, and then a little bit later on, some of my parents' friends and my friends in school introduced me to things like, James Cameron movies like Terminator, Aliens, Die Hard, and so on. So, I have that kind of background with movies, and, Ghostbusters fit right up there with like some of the most iconic and fun, like timeless movies that I've ever seen. Growing up, I didn't see any of those movies in the theater. I was too young, so we had them on videotape. And if I remember correctly, we had a purchase from the store from Blockbuster or something. We had a Ghostbusters 2, and then I think taped off of TV, we had Ghostbusters 1. I was really young when my parents first showed them to me, but for some reason I remember seeing Ghostbusters 2 more. Maybe it was because it was on a better videotape or it didn't have commercials and stuff like that. But I just really enjoyed Ghostbusters 2. Can I say it? I'm gonna say it. I enjoy Ghostbusters 2 just as much as the first one. Alright, take me away. No, seriously, I have ill feelings towards movies, and I am not afraid to talk about them, and I definitely can have an ego and be uptight about things. I mean, everybody has an opinion, but the thing about Ghostbusters 2 in particular that I really don't get the hate on is that it's really not different than Ghostbusters 1. So right there, I get it that people don't like it because it's too much the same. It was just a copy. It didn't live up to whatever expectations people, I guess, had for it at the time. But it's not a bad movie, number one. Number two, I think, again, it's just as good as the first one. Some reasons why. Number one, it feels like a Ghostbusters movie. It has the same aesthetic, has the same kind of music, has the same actors, of course, and the same characters, and I feel like they portray them the same way. They didn't change anything huge. Now, I know a lot of people have been saying that the humor was a little bit more substandard, that there were more one-liners and things like that, but you're telling me that, like...
Oh, it smells like barbecued dog hair.
You're telling me that that's not like the same level of one-liner as...
Sometimes it happens, someone has to deal with it, and who are you gonna call?
I mean, to me, that's like the same level of one-liner. Those are comedic actors saying really iconic lines. They both work. But unlike a lot of modern comedy movies, not just comedy movies, but just movies in general, looking at you, Force Awakens...
Get off! Get off!
Where they like literally stop the movie to like do a joke.
It's Finn, and I'm in charge. I'm in charge now, Phasma. I'm in charge.
Bring it down.
And oh, by the way, Christopher Nolan Batman movies, those movies are a perfect example. You can go back and look at scenes like this. I mean, they literally like stop the movie to put in, I know that they're trying to like lighten up the scene and not make it too heavy and everything, but they like stop the movie to have a joke. And you see this all the time in movies, like it doesn't come naturally, but hit my mic again. I gotta stop talking with my hands so much. But in both Ghostbuster movies, the jokes just kind of come situationally out of the characters and who they've established, these characters to be.
Like suck in the guts, guys, with the Ghostbusters.
I don't see any difference between the joke and dialogue and line delivery between the first one one and the second one. So the aesthetic, the feel, they both feel the same. The way that a lot of people said that the prequels, Star Wars prequels, didn't feel like the original, but then Force Awakens did. Ghostbusters 2, it didn't feel like a big departure. It felt like they existed in the same world, with the obvious exception, and we'll get to more of the story later, but with the obvious exception that, you know, the revisionist history where everybody hates the Ghostbusters at the beginning of Ghostbusters 2 for no reason. I always felt that kind of jarring too, but I mean, like I said, it's just one of those story choices that you just have to suspend your disbelief or not watch it. I don't know. I just went with it. You just have to assume that there was a Ghostbusters 1.5 that they explain why all of a sudden, you know, maybe there was a really bad PR case against them. In the second one, the mayor is upset with them and he doesn't want to hear from them. Maybe they had some kind of falling out. Maybe the Ghostbusters took all the mayor's thunder after they took down the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Gozer. You know, who knows? Like, I'm sure the writers had some kind of justification for it. But whatever, like, it worked in the context of that movie. They needed to start low so they could build themselves back up. And this leads me to my next point. I like the pacing better of the second one. Blasphemy, I know. The first half of the movie is like introductory. They're setting everything up. In the second one, we already know who everybody is and what the situations are, and they've established the bad guy pretty early on. So to me, the scenes have a little bit more inherent tension to them. And I'm talking about like the scene where they go down into the sewer. Like, that's a really tense scene. And as a kid, it scared the crap out of me. And then the courtroom scene, again, that scene, the way that it was written and the way that it was acted and the way that it was edited was a really cool, tense setup to the big explosive ghost coming out of the slime and the judge and how it all worked to like get the court, you know, case to go in the favor of the Ghostbusters. Like, it was funny, but it was also kind of frightening, especially for a younger audience. And it was exciting. It was intense, you know? The second Ghostbusters had a lot of really good scenes like that had a lot of tension and that were genuinely kind of scary. And they also amp up. So as the movie goes on, you know, you have these more sort of like comedic scenes that have frightening parts to it, like the courtroom and stuff like that. But then later on, when Winston and Ray are developing the photos of Vigo, and then they get stuck in there and everything sets on fire, that was a really cool but really intense scene.
What are we gonna do? Put our heads in the toilet?
Not that I want to waste a lot of time on this show, you know, responding to other people's responses to things and their opinions, but I just don't understand why people say that Ghostbusters 2 was meant, like, you know, for a younger audience and had like lighter fare, because it had some genuinely tense moments where the characters was set up that they could have been really harmed or killed. I think like the scene in Ghostbusters 1 where the dogs like come out of the couch around Dana and they pull her into that room, like that was a scary scene. And I thought Ghostbusters 2 lived up to that kind of moment all throughout the movie. They did a great job. So another reason that I like Ghostbusters just as much as the first one, maybe it was kind of repetitive, but when you're talking in a franchise, Chris Stuckman, one of my favorite movie reviewers, one of my inspirations for doing this, did a really good video about The Force Awakens and about franchise and story formula. And I don't see why Ghostbusters should be an exception to that. It's a franchise, there's been multiple installments, you know, and there's been other extraneous media around like video games and comics and cartoons and stuff, so it is a franchise. So like Chris says in his video about The Force Awakens, there are a necessary formula when it comes to, you know, delivering stories at the level of these like franchises. Ghostbusters is no exception. So the criticism about how like they use the Statue of Liberty to have some big thing at the end, just like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Well, first of all, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was a villain, and in the second one, the Statue of Liberty was their means to fight the villain. So that's totally different. Just because they were both big, how is that like an issue? But even if it is, you know, to some people, it still to me fits in that idea in the good sense of a formula. In the Ghostbusters, things have to escalate to the point that at the end, they need to have some kind of huge way of, you know, dealing with a problem. They can't just do it on a micro level because then it won't feel climactic. So, hence the Statue of Liberty. And the Statue of Liberty was awesome! Like, it was so much fun to watch a Ghostbusters steal an internationally recognized iconic landmark and walk it through the city. And that whole scene where they're playing the song, you know, the... And everybody's dancing and then they step on the cop car.
Sorry! Bye,
When are movies not allowed to be entertaining even if they're somewhat predictable? Like, how is that not most big budget movies, honestly? But in this case, it was super exciting, it was fun, it was visually interesting. I love it when Venkman puts down, or Egon or whoever, a Nintendo controller to control it. That was a great little wink, and it was appropriate for the time. That's when we had those controllers for our Nintendos. And then the climax was fantastic. I mean, Vigo was a really scary villain, and to me, I thought Vigo was scarier and a better villain than, I'm going there, Gozer the Gozerian, because we don't know much about Gozer and we don't see Gozer until the end of the movie. Vigo is in the movie and talked about, and we get a lot of information from him via the zany sidekicky guy. So I thought Vigo was a much more visceral and upfront presence and antagonist. Gozer was more antagonistic as the movie went on. I understand that for the first one, the movie was more about the Ghostbusters doing ghost busting, and Gozer was like a way for them to have a more focused climax. But for Ghostbusters 2, this is again a reason that I don't understand why people compare these movies as if they're like the same movie and just the second one is a copy, because the first one is much more like montagey and they're setting up stuff in the ghosts, even though it relates to Gozer eventually in the end. But in Ghostbusters 2, it really does specifically revolve around, and they're investigating, there's a mystery around Vigo and they're focused on Vigo, and Vigo's the antagonist. It felt like a more focused story, not to say that that's a good or bad thing, but to me it differentiated it from the first one. It has a different purpose and a different kind of flow, and they're shooting for a different target. So by the time you get to the end, then Vigo's been built up and hyped up to a degree that when they actually face off against him, it's scary. He can control them by shooting those weird breath at him and freezing them, and they're obviously in a bunch of pain, and as a little kid that was very like intense and visceral for me. Like, I couldn't even imagine being in that much pain, and that really affected me as a kid. It was scary. When Dana with the hose around her, and then there's a baby involved, and everybody's worried about the cute little baby, and I don't know, people probably feel like, oh, you put in a baby and then it gets all cutesy, and there were cute scenes with the baby.
You're short, your belly button sticks out too far, and you're a terrible burden on your poor mother.
But it gave a way for Venkman to extrapolate on his character a little bit more, because this guy, he's sort of like a non-committal, zany guy, and like he doesn't feel like he'd be a good dad, and so it gives him a chance to like show his merit, his value as a father figure, the person that he could have been if he made different choices. Like, there was some interesting character stuff going on there, for real. Dare I say, more so than the first one. The first one didn't have that same kind of familial core, and maybe that just speaks to me now because, you know, I'm a family man, but honestly, I haven't watched Ghostbusters 2 since I had a kid, and that worked for me just fine ever since I've been a kid. Ghostbusters 1, I felt the characters were strong, but it didn't have the same emotional core. It was more about the group. And then Venkman had his love interest with Dana, but they never really got to develop that. She was disgusted by him for most of the movie, so it just didn't have the same emotional core. But the second one had, you know, because of the baby and the breakup with Dana, their relationship and the baby involved was an emotional core of the movie. To me, gave the movie a little bit more emotional resonance, and that, to me, made the movie a little bit more memorable, especially in the climax. So you're worried about the baby, and like, what are the Ghostbusters gonna do? Just like the first one, they just shoot their proton packs at something and it blows up, and then, you know, everything's good. Just like the first one, that was obviously the same exact kind of climax, but again, leading into the climax and what was going on, you know, emotionally and thematically, the way it was built to, felt totally different to me than the first one. So that, to me, made it different than the first one. And so my point is, through all this, is that I don't get it, the hate on Ghostbusters 2. I think that it's undeserved. I think that people are just jumping on a bandwagon where they're just trying to, I mean, what is it, just like clickbait? I don't know. I want to say this right now because I don't have any aspirations to like get a ton of subscribers or get any money from this, that I don't care if my opinion isn't popular. I just want to be honest, and I don't want to jump on bandwagons. I don't want to just say something just to get my video clicked on. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm going to say how I really feel, but I'm also open to discourse. The reason, again, I'm calling this movie talk and not like, you know, Breathing Underwater or Dan's movie reviews or something like that, is because I like to talk about movies. I get really excited when people want to open up a discourse and not just like throw their opinions around because they feel that they're right. I'm not saying that I'm right about everything. I'm saying that this is how I feel, and Ghostbusters 2 is a great example of that. That's why I wanted to put this one out early, because I think this is a bigger picture kind of thing, is that I have certain perspectives and feelings on this movie and other movies that I know that other people don't share, and I felt compelled to give another perspective on it, because I just feel that it's really unfair that so much just hate and vitriol just kind of arbitrarily gets thrown at something, people just like it and they'd be like, yeah, I feel like that too. But I mean, do you really? And if you're watching this, do you really feel like Ghostbusters 2 should never have been made or whatever, or it's a complete copy of the first one, it's no good on its own? Let me know below and I would love to discuss that with you. What I'd like to hear, and I'm going to say this now too, if people ever watch this and I ever get comments, I have no tolerance for trolls and haters and everything from just saying, hey, first, or saying like mean stuff about me or my stupid beard or whatever you want to talk about. I don't have patience for that. I'm going to delete it because to me that's not discourse, that's not discussion, that's not talk, that's not respect. That is just YouTube, internet nonsense, and I am not doing this to participate in that or open up a forum for that. I would like to actually talk about movies. And I know Dave does too. And if you have something that you want to talk about, please comment below or email me. I'll put all that in the description. I'd love to hear your thoughts and tell me that you disagree with me and that you think Ghostbusters 2 is just a complete ripoff of the first one. But if you have an opinion like that, I'd love to see you back it up. Show me in the movie where it's just a complete ripoff and that there's nothing new or fresh about it. Like I've been saying, in the film, there are definite moments that smack of the first one that seem almost exactly like the first one. Like when they're shooting their proton packs at the painting, just like they did at Gozer, or when they're like, you know, they're catching ghosts and like whatever else, or the structure. We can talk about that, but I dare you to look a little bit deeper. Okay, so maybe they're performing the same action, but does it have the same purpose? Do they have the same goal? Are the characters doing it for the same reasons? Are the characters the same people as they were in the first one? Did the writers build in anything else to give it kind of its own fresh take? And I think that they did. I think that Ghostbusters 2 is a good movie and it stands on its own. Apart from the first one as a good movie, but together I think they make really good companions, and I am disappointed that they never made a third one because after those first two I thought were very strong. They could have made a really, really good trilogy, especially on the path that they were headed with the way those movies were going. I think they could have done a lot with it, but I also think that if they had made a third one, I think it might have bombed, especially if it was the same cast and same director, because I think that it probably would have followed a similar formula, just like Indiana Jones and Star Wars and, oh my gosh, Marvel. I think people would have had a hard time looking past that, and I think people would have just been yearning for the days of the first one. But just because the first movie is excellent doesn't mean it doesn't also have its flaws, and that they couldn't improve upon those flaws or at least try something different when they made the sequel, and they did in this case. That is true in other movies too. So I'm going to stop ranting there for now, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I need to come up with a better outro, but for now, since I've been compared to Fred Durst when I put my hat on backwards, I'm going to say peace out. What is Fred Durst? I don't. Why am I talking about Fred Durst? Be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1 and drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted. And all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.